You thought awakening would feel like light, like rising out of something, like stepping into the sun after years in a dim room. You expected relief, maybe even joy. You were told that awakening would bring peace, purpose, a sense of higher clarity, that you would feel found, that you'd never be the same in a good way. But what no one really told you is that awakening begins by breaking you open. Because for many, the first stage of spiritual awakening isn't peace. It's disorientation, a strange hollowness, a quiet void that creeps in where certainty used to live. You no longer see the world through the same eyes, but you also haven't yet learned how to be this new version of yourself. And so you wake up not into light but into silence. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It's loud, deafening even. It echoes with everything you used to believe but no longer trust. It rings with questions you were never allowed to ask, and answers that no longer satisfy. You thought this would feel like freedom, and in some distant future way, it might. But first, it feels like you've lost your footing, like someone rearranged the sky while you were sleeping, and now even your favorite stars are missing. And you ask yourself, why do I feel more empty now that I've awakened? You look around, and suddenly the conversations that once excited you feel shallow. The goals you once chased now seem meaningless. The people you used to lean on now feel far away, even if they're standing right next to you. It's like watching your old life through glass. You're still in it, but you're not of it anymore. And that's where the ache begins. You didn't ask to lose your identity. You didn't ask for everything to unravel. You only asked to feel connected, to feel truth, to feel whole. But the soul has its own way of answering. And often, the answer comes as a breaking. Carl Jung wrote that, "You don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that's what's happening here. The emptiness you feel isn't the absence of awakening. It's the evidence of it. Because real spiritual awakening doesn't start by filling you. It starts by emptying you of everything you thought you had to be, everything you clung to for worth, identity, stability, everything you performed just to be accepted. And so the first thing to go is the illusion that you have to always be strong, the illusion that productivity equals value, the illusion that your past defines you, the illusion that you're alone in your pain. They fall away quietly or violently, and you're left standing in the middle of yourself, unsure who you are without them. This is not failure, this is sacred space. This is the dismantling before the becoming. And it's terrifying. It's terrifying because your egoth part of you that kept everything together is screaming. It wants to go back. It wants to be useful. It wants to know things again. But your soul is whispering, be still, and let what is false fall. Be still, and let your grief rise. Be still, and let yourself feel what you've been avoiding for years, because underneath the silence, something is waiting to be born. But birth takes time, and while the spiritual world loves to talk about ascension, light, and high vibrations, birth doesn't look like that. It looks like blood, and breath, and breaking. It looks like crying on the floor at 3 a.m. wondering who you're becoming. It looks like losing interest in the life you carefully built. It looks like emptiness, but not the kind of emptiness that means nothing, the kind that means space for something more honest, more rooted, more you. And in that space, everything begins to shift. You no longer crave what you used to chase. You begin to grieve the version of you that lived in survival. You start noticing what hurts and what heals. You stop reaching for validation and start reaching for silence. Not to escape, but to listen, because now, for the first time, your soul has room to speak. And it doesn't speak in grand revelations. It speaks in tiny nudges, a breath, a memory, a moment of quiet presence that somehow feels more real than any achievement ever did. This is the beginning, not of certainty, not of clarity, but of truth. And truth is quiet. It doesn't need to convince. It simply is. So if you're here right now floating in that silent space between who you were and who you're becoming, know this: you are not broken, you are not lost. You are in between, and the in-between is holy. After awakening, something stirs beneath the surface. Not light, not bliss, but shadow. And it's disorienting, because no one told you this part would feel darker than before. You thought enlightenment would lift you up, not bury you under the weight of forgotten memories, old wounds, and hidden fears. But the truth is, awakening doesn't just bring light, it also pulls up everything you've hidden from the light. Carl Jung called this the shadow. It is everything we've suppressed, denied, or cast aside to be loved. Every emotion we weren't allowed to feel. Every truth we weren't allowed to speak. Every part of ourselves we were taught to be ashamed of. And now, in the quiet that awakening creates, those shadows finally have room to speak. You might feel waves of anger for things you thought you'd forgiven, resentment toward people you still love, shame that creeps in for no clear reason, sadness that has no story. And it confuses you, because wasn't this supposed to be a higher state of being? But you're not regressing. You're revealing. Awakening strips away the layers that kept you numb. And beneath those layers is not peace waiting on the surface. It's pain. Unresolved, unspoken, unprocessed. That's why it hurts. That's why you feel more lost, more emotional, more raw than before. You didn't suddenly become worse. You just became aware. And awareness, though powerful, is not always comfortable, because you begin to see the ways you abandoned yourself to be accepted, the ways you performed strength to avoid being rejected, the ways you stayed silent to avoid being left behind. You see yourself not as the polished version others knew, but as the whole, unfiltered, aching soul you've always been beneath the performance. And it's overwhelming. The shadow doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to invite you home. But that homecoming begins with grief. Grief for the child in you who never felt safe. Grief for the teenager who was told to shrink. Grief for the adult who built a life on silent suffering. Grief for all the years you called that normal. You don't need to fix it. You need to feel it. You need to sit with the parts of you that have never had a voice. You need to cry the tears you've been holding back for decades. You need to let your heart break without rushing to glue it back together, because only in breaking do we learn what truly matters. Only in stillness do we meet the parts of ourselves that were never allowed to breathe. And this is where shadow work begins. Not in books, not in theories, but in breath, in memory, in sitting in the dark and whispering, "I see you now." In feeling emotions you don't understand, but honoring them anyway. In holding space for anger without shame. In letting grief have a home. It's not glamorous, it's not beautiful, but it's real. And real is where healing starts. You might find yourself needing more time alone, not out of isolation, but out of honesty. You no longer want to perform. You no longer have the energy to pretend. You crave silence because noise feels like poison now. You want fewer words but deeper ones. Fewer people but truer connections. This is not detachment, it's discernment. Your soul is beginning to choose what aligns and releasing what was only ever distraction. The emptiness you feel in this season is not a void, it is space. And space is necessary for integration. As you face the shadow, your nervous system may feel overwhelmed, exhausted, even numb. That's okay. You're not meant to power through this. You're meant to slow down, soften, surrender, because healing doesn't come through force. It comes through compassion. Compassion for the moments you lost yourself. Compassion for the beliefs you once needed to survive. Compassion for the version of you that didn't know better, but did their best. You are not your shadow, but you are responsible for meeting it. And when you do, you'll find that beneath the pain is power. Beneath the rage is truth. Beneath the grief is wisdom. And beneath all of it is love. Not the romantic kind, not the performative kind, but the kind that stays. The kind of love that says, you don't have to be fixed. You only have to be felt. And that's what this part of your journey is asking of you, to feel, to face, to forgive, to finally, fully, come home to yourself. Not the self the world told you to be, not the image you curated for safety, but the soul that's been whispering beneath it all, I'm still here. You haven't failed. You haven't fallen off your path. You are standing in the sacred middle of the place between your awakening and your becoming, and though it feels like darkness, it is, in truth, the beginning of your return to light. After the collapse, there is silence. Not the frightening kind anymore, but the sacred kind. The kind that wraps around you like a warm blanket in the dark. You're not running anymore. You're simply sitting with what is. And from that stillness, something new begins to rise. It doesn't come quickly. It doesn't come with fanfare. It arrives slowly, gently, almost without you noticing, a small desire, a soft idea, a quiet pull towards something that feels honest. This is the beginning of rebuilding. But unlike the life you built before this, one won't be rooted in survival. It won't be built around expectations or fear of not being enough. It won't be about impressing or performing or achieving just to feel worthy. This time, it will be different. This life will be built from the inside out. You no longer ask, "What should I do to succeed?" Instead, you ask, "What makes me feel alive?" You stop chasing validation. You start following resonance. You stop trying to fit in. You start listening to the rhythms of your own soul. At first, this feels disorienting, because the world doesn't reward slowness. It doesn't understand quiet joy or invisible growth. It wants to see the results. It wants the resume, the metrics, the milestones. But your soul is not interested in performance anymore. It is interested in peace. And peace doesn't always look productive. Sometimes, peace looks like resting in the middle of the day, like saying no to something that looks good but feels wrong, like walking away from relationships that drain you, even if they've been part of your story for years. And that takes courage, because when you awaken, you don't just let go of the past, you let go of who you were inside it. And that version of you might still be loved by others. That version of you might still be rewarded. But you know, deep down, that it's no longer real. So you begin again. You start with what's small and true. A morning that feels gentle, a conversation that feels safe, a book that stirs your spirit, a place that calms your breath. You don't rebuild from ambition, you rebuild from authenticity. And that means learning to live slowly, to live in rhythm with your body, to rest when you're tired, not just when you've earned it, to eat when you're hungry, not just when the clock says to create from inspiration, not obligation. This is what embodiment looks like. It's not just believing new truths, it's living them. It's letting your nervous system feel safe enough to stop bracing for impact. It's letting joy come in small, quiet ways. It's letting sadness sit beside you without trying to change it. Because you're not here to escape your humanity. You're here to honor it. You're not here to rise above pain. You're here to let it teach you how to stay soft in a world that tried to harden you. You're not here to avoid darkness. You're here to walk through it with your heart still open. And that changes everything. You stop measuring your healing by how happy you are. You start measuring it by how honest you can be, by how gently you speak to yourself, by how slowly you move through discomfort, by how present you are with what is real. You start to feel moments of contentment without needing a reason. You feel gratitude not because everything is perfect, but because you're no longer abandoning yourself. You find yourself smiling at nothing, crying over something beautiful, sitting with your coffee like it's a prayer. And in those moments, you realize you're no longer empty. You are full in a way that's quiet and invisible, full of breath, full of awareness, full of your own presence. And this time, the fullness isn't coming from outside. It's coming from you, because you finally made space for the truth to live in you. You finally stopped trying to earn love and started becoming it. You finally let go of who the world wanted you to be and began remembering who you were before it all. And no, not everyone will understand this new version of you. Some may leave, some may question, but you won't need to prove anything anymore. You'll know what's real not because it makes sense, but because it feels like home. That's how you'll know you're healing. Not when life is perfect, but when your heart feels safe inside your body again, when you can breathe without bracing, when silence no longer feels like punishment but like presence, when you no longer need to escape because you've finally come home. And this home? It's not a place. It's a way of being. It's not made of walls and furniture. It's made of boundaries and honesty. It's made of soft mornings and slow evenings. It's made of truth and trust and tenderness. This is what you're building now. Not a new identity, a new intimacy with yourself, a new integrity with your values, a new foundation where joy doesn't have to be loud to be real. You're not starting over. You're returning to the part of you that's always been here, the part that whispered, even in the emptiness, "I'm still with you." After awakening, the silence becomes louder, and for a while it can feel like loneliness. You scroll through your contacts, but don't feel like talking. You enter a room full of people, but something in you stays untouched. You try to return to the places that once made you feel alive, but they no longer do. And in that emptiness, a question quietly forms. Will anyone ever understand me again? This is the ache of loneliness, not the absence of people, but the absence of connection. Not because others have changed, but because you have. And now, your soul is speaking a language that not everyone around you can hear. At first, this feels like exile, like being sent away from everything familiar, and in a way it is, because awakening often comes with separation from old roles, old versions of yourself, and sometimes old relationships that were built on who you used to be. But what if this isn't exile? What if this is initiation? You're not being cut off, you're being called inward, because there's a difference between loneliness and sacred solitude. Loneliness is an ache for connection. It's when you long to be seen, heard, known, but no one around you has the capacity to meet you there. It comes with heaviness, restlessness, and the temptation to numb the discomfort. But solitude is something else entirely. Solitude is not the absence of others, it's the presence of yourself. It's when the quiet stops feeling empty and starts feeling alive. When you begin to enjoy your own company. When you find comfort in the stillness and beauty in the breath. When silence no longer feels like rejection but like sanctuary. And that shift doesn't happen all at once. It begins slowly. In the moments you stop filling the space with noise. In the mornings when you choose stillness over scrolling. In the evenings when you light a candle not for anyone else, but for yourself. In the way you begin to savor your own presence, instead of escaping it, and you start to realize, maybe solitude is not something to survive, maybe it's something to receive. Because in solitude, you begin to hear the voice beneath the noise, the one that whispers instead of shouts, the one that doesn't demand your attention, but patiently waits for your presence. That voice is you, the part of you that's been silenced by expectations, distractions, and performance, the part that has been drowned out by constant doing, the part that doesn't speak in likes, followers, or productivity, but in depth, clarity, and truth. And that voice doesn't need to be louder. It needs to be listened to, because when you truly listen, you begin to know yourself, not just your thoughts, but your patterns, your fears, your longings, your boundaries, your wisdom. And that kind of knowing builds a foundation that no relationship, no job, no identity crisis can shake. Solitude becomes sacred when you stop trying to fix it, when you stop labeling it as a problem, when you stop seeing it as a failure and start seeing it as a gift. The gift of slowing down, the gift of presence, the gift of truth. In solitude, you begin to redefine what intimacy means. It's no longer about someone else completing you. It's about you coming home to yourself, holding your own hand, being your own safe place, sitting with your joy, holding space for your pain. And in that self-intimacy, something profound happens. The fear of being alone begins to dissolve, because you realize you were never truly alone. You had simply forgotten how to be with you. The world told you that worth comes from being chosen, that your value is measured by how many people love you. But your soul knows that your worth is intrinsic, that even in silence, you are whole. And from this sacred solitude, you begin to relate to others differently. You no longer seek relationships that distract you from yourself. You seek connections that mirror your truth. You stop settling for surface-level comfort. You start craving depth, presence, reciprocity, and you're no longer afraid to walk alone because you know what you carry within. That's when everything begins to change. Loneliness is no longer something you fear. It becomes a teacher, a revealer, a purifier, and solitude becomes sacred ground. So if you're sitting in silence tonight, wondering if you're broken, you're not. You're becoming. If you're aching for someone to see you, start by seeing yourself. If the emptiness feels unbearable, let it become spacious, because what you meet in the silence will guide you home. There comes a moment quiet, almost invisible, when the ache begins to soften, not because everything suddenly makes sense, not because the path becomes straight or easy, but because something inside you settles, something weary within you finally exhales, and you realize you've survived the storm, not by escaping it, but by staying present through it. You begin to notice how far you've come in miles, but in depth, you're not who you were when this began. And though you may still feel unsure, what you carry now is different. It's not answers, it's awareness. You understand now that what felt like emptiness was never absence, it was transformation. You weren't falling apart, you were being rewritten, unfolded, cleared of everything false so truth could finally have a place to land. Your soul was not punishing you with silence, it was preparing you for clarity. And that clarity doesn't arrive as fireworks. It arrives in quiet mornings when your breath feels sacred again, in small choices that honor your truth, in boundaries that feel like love instead of guilt, in the return of softness where you used to be guarded. That's how you know you're healing. When you stop trying to become someone else and start trusting who you already are. The you beneath the masks, the you before the conditioning, the you that didn't need to prove anything to be worthy of peace. That's the truth you were being led back to all along. And now, you begin to move differently. Not because life is easier, but because you are more rooted. You no longer need external validation to feel valuable. You no longer chase connection to avoid yourself. You no longer run from pain, you welcome its lessons with compassion. You live more slowly now, more intentionally. You say no without shame. You rest without apology. You love without losing yourself. You create from inspiration, not obligation. You walk through the world with a kind of quiet power that only comes from having walked through the fire and stayed soft. And from this place, your energy becomes healing for others, yes, but most importantly, for you. You speak to yourself with more tenderness. You hold space for your needs without explanation. You stop outsourcing your worth. You stop abandoning your heart. And you begin to trust that présence et non perfection is what makes you powerful. That's the beauty of this journey. It strips you. It challenges you. It tests you. But only so you can come back to what's real. Not the version of life handed to you. Not the one approved by others. But the life that feels like home in your body. You no longer ask, what will make them love me? You ask, what brings me peace? You no longer ask, how can I become enough? You ask, what can I release that was never mine to carry? And that shift, quiet as it may be, changes everything. Because once you begin living from wholeness instead of hunger, from truth instead of performance, from trust instead of fear, you no longer need to fill the emptiness, because it no longer exists. You look back and realize, it was never emptiness. It was space. It was invitation. It was sacred ground. So if you're still in the middle of ITIF, the silence still feels heavy, if the loneliness still stings, if the emptiness still echoes, I want you to hear this, not just with your mind, but with your heart. You are not failing. You are not broken. You are becoming. And everything that feels uncertain now is part of your unfolding. Let it happen. Let yourself breathe. Let yourself cry. Let yourself rest. Let yourself rise. Let yourself begin again, not because you must, but because you can. You were never meant to stay the same. You were made to evolve, to remember, to return to the sacred truth already inside you. And the fact that you're here, still breathing, still trying, still listening, means you're already doing it. So keep going. And if this message spoke to something deep inside of you, if it gave language to what you've been quietly carrying, I invite you to stay. This space was created for souls like yours. You don't have to walk this path alone. So if you feel seen, if you feel a little more understood, if you want more messages like this rooted in truth, in softness, in awakening, please consider subscribing to this channel. Like this video if it resonated. Share it with someone who may be quietly walking through the same valley. And most of all, come back, because the journey inward doesn't end, it deepens. And in the depths of you, there's always more to discover.